Hello, it's Heather with Prescriptive Living, the place our savvy singles come to get tips to fail-proof your life and love. Today we're talking about one of the most important areas that people go into life with and love with because it is the difference maker between being in a place of settling or having a poor outcome many times versus being able to get what you're wanting out of life and love and reaching fulfillment in the journey. Okay, so that's what we're going to be talking about here. We're going to cover this in detail. And if you know, like, one thing I do want to say, if you're not part of our Facebook community, things like that, I do share more personal stories there. And so I recently did a Facebook Live on the data behind the show The Bachelor and Bachelorette, because part of what I'm talking about here is tied into that. And so that's a great place to go to get insider perspective. So in the description below, if you want to be part of that insider community, make sure to connect with us there, and we'll talk more about those personal things and some of those stories. Whereas here, we're really focusing mostly on the tips and tricks and programs to get people to fail-proof their life and love. And we do these videos every week. We do one a week. And so I'm excited that you're here. I'm excited that you're watching, and we're going to start talking about this now. But what ends up happening inside of all of our lives, we have standards for, how we expect things to turn out, how we desire things to go, how we, really how we show up in a lot of different ways. And what happens is a lot of times these standards we have are just kind of tucked down inside, and they don't really get thought about or brought up much until something like conflicts with them or frustrates them or makes you disappointed in what's going on. And then you start to think, this isn't what I expected. This is what I wanted. I'm disappointed. I'm frustrated. And a lot of times it's because your standards were inside and now they're not being met, and you're realizing, like, this is frustrating. So what happens is the difference between people getting to a place of where they settle or have a bad outcome versus whether they actually get fulfillment and accomplish the things that they want to do is if they are being really clear on their standards. And I'm talking the good, the bad, the ugly, the indifferent, and everything in between. When you have those pieces, not only of, clarity, kind of like the blueprint, but also the awareness of all of those nuances, then you can really go in and you can establish connection, relationships, plans, all around those bases. But when you don't start with those and you're just kind of bumbling along, and then things are frustrating you and disappointing you because the standards you have are not being, honored and haven't really been discussed or thought about, but there's just something off. That is a lot of times the reason why. And so, with that, we talked about how in our 6 courses of Uncommon Love, we recently transformed those into a 2-part series where everything that has to do with giving people the mastery and the self-awareness and self-mastery and self-love to really understand their standards on the good, the bad, the ugly, the indifferent, and everything in between that impacts their journey through life and love. We go through all that deep in that course. And so that people can really establish their blueprint to be really clear on what they're doing, why they're doing what they're wanting, and be able to know what's really important to connect with, align to, and adjust around. And so that's just something I want to share. A lot of us have standards inside already. We have expectations, we have goals. But when we don't bring those kind of at the forefront of what we're doing and really owning those and creating our life around those, a lot of times life, again, throws us some hard curveballs, and we get very frustrated in the process. I'm going to share a story, and then we'll sign off. But this story is in the 18th century. There was a condition going around where after women gave birth to children, they were dying. And in some hospitals, it was as much as 70% of women were dying after childbirth. And this happened for decades. They called it the black bed, or the black death of childbed. And what the reason was going on is they found out that the doctors were not really washing their hands between delivering of babies. And they were told, hey, you guys, you need to wash your hands. That's what's going on here. The doctors would not take that advice. So for 3 more decades, they killed so many women because they would not take responsibility and do something so simple to protect the life of those they cared for. And after 30 years of just devastating consequences of something that they could have done that was so simple, finally awareness was brought forth that this really was the problem, and practices were changed, and women were no longer dying after having a baby. And so much in life really does come down to how we approach what we're doing. If there are things that aren't working out in our life and in our love, the truth is we're the common denominator in that story. We're the one. And sometimes we may just have to wash our hands, or girl, wash your face, whatever it may be, to be able to get different outcomes. Because without it, you just go, and there can be really catastrophic consequences. This is one story I've shared. I could share a lot more. In fact, on these videos, you're going to find I start sharing more stories that good and the bad of showing what happens when people aren't really using their soul power, the mind, will, and emotions with mastery, and then they don't have the skills to navigate the relationships, which is what we cover all in course 2. So anyway, I'm going to sign off today, but I do want to get you to think about like the things in your life that are you just kind of letting life happen, bumbling through, and then getting disappointed and frustrated because all these stuffed in good, bad, different, indifferent, and ugly standards are inside of you and not being brought on the surface in a way where you can navigate relationships and outcomes with much better success. If that is the case, I want to encourage you to pay some time and attention to those standards you have and begin to nurture those so that you don't end up in that settling or dysfunction space later on. And if you really want to get like your absolute blueprint for mastery, join us in the course. We're going to have those launching on a regular basis. We'll announce some of those dates on our Facebook Prescriptive Living page soon. And you'll be able to really have your perfect blueprint kind of mapped out so that you have deep awareness and understanding of the good, the bad, the indifferent, and the ugly, literally all of it. And so that is what we are going to do there. So join us if you want. If not, cheers to living and loving well, and we'll see you all soon. Bye.